Hi, this is Shlomi Ron, CEO of the Visual Storytelling Institute and host of the Visual Storytelling Today show. Thanks for stopping by. The show is designed for you, the marketer or entrepreneur who may be struggling to rise above the communication noise and looking for more effective ways to connect better with audiences through the exciting world of visual storytelling. The show is about introducing you to inspiring visual storytellers from diverse industries that bring fresh perspective on how to capture attention, build trust, emotional empathy, and last but not least, drive business results. We cover all aspects of visual stories, from images, videos, infographics, live sketching, to AR and VR. The focus is about the craft of how to create authentic brand stories that support really empowering brand narratives. As you may know, at the end of the day, people don't care about product features. They connect with your story only when it emotionally mirrors their problem. The show is produced by the Visual Storytelling Institute, the primary think tank that brings the gospel of visual storytelling from the world of art into marketing. Learn more about our visual storytelling training, production, and consulting programs on visualstorytell.com. Enjoy the show. Today, the topic is going to be how to tell visual stories like a media company. As you all know, in recent years, content marketing has started to become a very popular marketing discipline, with the major brands like Marriott and others bringing their entire media operation in-house, and in essence, operating like a media powerhouse. So I just figured, since our audience is comprised of entrepreneurs and marketers that basically would like to get better in visual storytelling, why not ask a real media company how they do it? So that's why I'm so excited to have Stephanie Paterik. She's executive editor at Adweek, to talk a little bit about how she put together her visual storytelling studio and her journey along the way. So with that, welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Shlomi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So before we dig deeper into the wonders of visual storytelling in Adweek, maybe you kind of frame the conversation a little bit and talk about a little bit about your journey, how you started.
Of course, I feel obligated to admit to you and your guests up front that I don't consider myself a visual journalist. So I'm a word person. I came to the industry as a writer, but I've since worked with and managed a lot of visual people, so I can speak to it from that level. My backstory is I started as a newspaper reporter, and I covered the business of tourism, retail, and gaming, so at casinos, for the Wall Street Journal's bureau out in LA, for the Arizona Republic. I worked as a managing editor for Phoenix Magazine. And then in my late 20s, I kind of had a radical career change. My husband, who's also a journalist, and also from Phoenix, we're both from there originally, we decided to move to New York. And we moved in January of 2009, which if you go back in time, you might remember that's when the economy was completely tanking. And it wasn't the easiest time to pick up and move to a new city and find work. And so very quickly, I kind of dove into a creative life. And I ended up becoming an MFA graduate student at the New School, studying poetry, and had a very bohemian lifestyle. I was, writing poetry all day, in class all night, going to poetry readings late at night at bars around the city, and just immersing myself in this creative world, right? But, poets got to eat, got to make money. And so I also was doing a lot of freelancing on the side and built up what became a very successful freelance business. And long story short, Adweek was one of my clients. And at one point they came to me with a project. It was their chief content officer at the time, said, look, we really want to build up the digital side of the newsroom, and I need someone kind of on the ground who can help me do that day to day. So I came on board for what was supposed to be a 2-month project. And 5 years later, 5 years actually this month, I'm still here. And so my original remit was to sort of, build up our digital storytelling.
Got it.
And I oversaw a small but sort of growing team of journalists who included web editors and web artists, so sort of word people and art people working together to make digital stories. And that's how it began.
That's amazing. It's kind of interesting because I did some research before the show, and I kind of look up when was the first time content marketing was actually used, and it's actually back in 1996, and it was in a newspaper conference of all places. So, which is almost logical, right? Because we kind of borrow it from, the newspaper industry, borrow it to the marketing industry, and now we kind of going back again. So it's kind of interesting journey.
I love that. So the phrase content marketing originated with the newspaper, because I remember back in the day when it was called advertorial, or, it sort of had this negative connotation, and that's completely changed, in the last 10 years. And it's become such, high quality and very respected. So it's been neat to chart that change.
Yeah. So obviously content marketing is really the larger umbrella of the discipline of telling stories, and visual storytelling is a subset in this world. So one of the things I like to do with my guests is ask them, since visual storytelling when I started was primarily referred to as graphic design, photography, filmmaking, was not really anchored in a marketing or business context. So I'm kind of wondering, how would you define visual storytelling from your perspective?
For me, it's really storytelling that engages the senses. Mm-hmm. It's a sensory form of storytelling. And I say that because, again, as a writer, when I hear storytelling, I tend to go to language. It's like telling a story through language. For me, visual storytelling is adding in the senses. So first sight, right? But then if you're working with video, you have sound. And then even with, the sort of explosion of, or the popularity of experiential marketing, you can add in touch as well. So I actually really love the word multimedia storytelling too, because I think it kind of brings all those things together.
Yeah, I like it a lot, especially when you talk about the word, because I think when you read books, a lot of people refer to visual storytelling from the mental perspective, where you kind of bring to life scenes that you read, and in essence create visual stories in your mind, because obviously my interpretation is going to be different from yours or other people, but because it's interplay between your past experiences and what you're reading at this point. So that's kind of interesting aspect of visual storytelling as well.
I love that. And that's such a great point about all art, right? It's not a one-way communication, it's two ways. So what is the artist or the storyteller bringing, but then what is that, viewer or reader bringing? Yeah. And that's why every story we tell, I think, is received in as many different ways as the number of people who read it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about, in your journey, how you kind of created the Visual Newsroom. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what is it about, how it came into fruition.
Absolutely. So I mentioned, we sort of started with the goal of just building up a digital team. And we did that with some success, and then realized that, this is around 2017, we had a print team and a digital team. And they were separate. So there was a group of artists and editors who were working on the weekly print magazine. There was a group of artists and editors working on, our digital stories. And there wasn't a lot of contact between the two. And I began to see that as a real gap in our ability to tell stories and our ability to serve readers. For example, we'd have a photo shoot for the cover with, some amazing celebrity, but we wouldn't, capture anything for social media for it. We're thinking about it in a very print way, and vice versa, right? So so we decided that year to actually reorganize our newsroom and create what we call the Visual Newsroom, or we call it the VNR, kind of internally here. And with that, we basically put anyone who's an artist, with anyone who's a visual or audio person, we put them together in one team. So now print specialists, we're working alongside digital specialists, we're working alongside video, podcast specialists, they are all together. And they've been going strong for 3 years. It's an 8-person team. And we invested by expanding the team. So we added new members, particularly on the video side. We built a studio, so that was new. Once they got together, they very quickly told us, hey, we have this laundry list of equipment and, space needs.
Wish list of toys, right?
Say that again?
Toys wish list.
Yes, exactly. They want toys, and we give them to them because they do amazing things with it. It's worth the investment.
Yeah, sure.
And they cross train each other. So I think that's been a really fantastic part of it, is that our classic print journalists are now turning our covers into GIFs, and our web artists are learning how to film and edit video. So it's been a really fantastic change for our company, and I hope for our readers.
So if I kind of wear the marketer hat and try to maybe create a newsroom for my company, can you talk a little bit about the process? Is the printed articles is the first initiative to create content, and then you repurpose it into a video, to a podcast? What is the kind of a chain reaction?
That's a great question. We really, before this change, we were print first. So we would think through, say, a cover story for the magazine in terms of print. What's the headline that makes sense for print? What's the layout that makes sense for print? Yeah. And then on Friday night, the print story would be handed off to the web team, and they would have a couple of hours to figure out how to visualize it for digital, right? Yeah. Now we are digital first. It's something it's kind of a mantra. We're digital first. And so we created, we have a features meeting that, again, everyone from all platforms are a part of. And so from the very beginning, before that story has been written, before the photo shoot has happened, we're thinking through how it's going to play out on every channel, including social. So we were thinking across all platforms from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And we actually lay it out. We design it on the digital page first, and then kind of convert it to in copy for print. So a change in process, I think, has helped a change in thinking.
Right. No, that's amazing, especially these days, with so many channels to distribute your stories. So it only makes sense to start with digital.
Yes. Yes.
Another aspect for visual storytelling that I'm sure you are coming across every day is the need to address emotions. And how do you go about using the right emotions in your stories? Do you do in advance research on your audience to know what their top emotions that might work, or it's story specific?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, for me, where my mind goes to that, how do we tap into emotion when we are telling business stories, is making sure that we are writing about people. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be a danger in B2B media in particular, right? Because we're getting into the nitty gritty of topics. We're writing about things that on the surface might seem dry, like programmatic and ad tech. Yeah. And so I'm always thinking about how to humanize that and who are the people behind it. One example is we recently, our programmatic editor wrote a story about how Google is planning to get rid of third-party cookies. Mm-hmm. And it was a big story, big news that's going to have a lot of implication in the entire marketing industry. And after his story came out, he was telling me that, when this news came out, his phone started blowing up from all of these people who work in ad tech, who were pulling their hair out saying, oh my gosh, it's all over. The game is over. The industry's over. And I said, why don't you follow that up with the existential crisis story? Ad tech is having an existential crisis, and just talk to people about, how they think this is going to play out, how it's going to affect their industry and their jobs. And that story came out just recently and was very popular. So yeah, I'm always thinking about how to humanize things.
And when you talk about humanizing, obviously part of this is really including also, the bad, not just the good stuff, just to kind of create failures, imperfections, vulnerabilities. Is this something in your, you try to pay attention to this?
Absolutely. I love that you brought this up. I actually for years have lobbied to create a vertical on our site called failure. No one has no one's taken me up on this. but I personally would love to I could read story after story about how people fail up. I think it's such an interesting topic. I'll be honest, it's hard in this industry because we're often talking to marketers.
Right.
We're talking to people whose entire job and whose entire specialty is to kind of present things the way that they want to. And people can be really reluctant to kind of, show what I think of as the bruise on the apple. What's the thing that's not going well, or what was the struggle? But it's not an easy thing as marketing journalists to get to. But again, I think relationships is a big part of it, and establishing trust with our sources and making people feel safe and sharing those stories is important.
Yeah, no, love it. So one thing that actually it's coming from directly from my newsletter that I published this morning. Got a lot of reactions, so I'm kind of curious to know what you're thinking about. So obviously, I'm not talking about paid media now, strictly organic, but when you publish content and obviously you're looking for a high readership, how do you balance the need to optimize the content so algorithm will actually see it versus maintaining sense of creativity and innovation? Because
yes, and
these are like two different things.
Yeah, and when you say algorithm, are you speaking in terms of SEO?
SEO could be out the Google algorithms, but at the same time it could be social media algorithm, because you got to do optimization there as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is definitely something that we have dealt with, like all other media companies, particularly over the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. What we see is that the places that are driving our readers to our site keep changing. So, 2 years ago, half of our site traffic was coming from Facebook. And so we put a ton of emphasis on stories that would resonate on Facebook. And then they changed their algorithm. We saw that decline very quickly. And sorry, I'm realizing my computer just made a noise. Anyway, I'll pick back up.
It's Slack, right?
Yes, it is Slack. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to log out of Slack really quickly here. Okay.
I thought it was mine.
So we saw that change very quickly. And then we saw it started to change to search. A lot of readers have been coming to us, finding us through Google. Right. And but then this year, Google changed its algorithm, and that started to change. And now, lately for us, Apple News is what's driving a lot of our readers. So what I've had to get comfortable with is that you have to reassess your strategy every month. Almost, you can't just set your strategy for 2020, say we're going to focus on this platform and then leave it. You have to really monitor the data every week. I do look at the data every Monday morning. At like 4:30 in the morning, I get an email from Parsley, which is a data analytics that kind of shows how our page views are going and where our readers are coming from. So the way I start my week is looking at the data and then reporting that up to my CEO and, down and across to my reporters and artists. So everyone kind of knows where we're at. Where I feel attention, which you might be getting at too, is between page views and loyal readers. And with our content, we can go really broad. We can write stories about advertising that are going to interest anyone who likes watching commercials during the Super Bowl, for example. And we can get a lot of page views, and that looks really great. But is that really serving our core reader? So that's a change actually we've made over the last year, is really refocusing on who our core reader is and making sure that we're serving them making sure we're giving them information that helps them do their job better, even if that means taking a bit of a hit on page views. Like maybe this story isn't going to be for everybody, but it's going to be so valuable for that person in this niche part of the industry.
Right. So let me dig deeper on this topic because I think it's fascinating. So when you actually sitting in putting together your editorial calendar for the coming month, or let's say for the next month, is what's driving your decision is what you see in the data, or is it ideas that your team is coming up with based on what they see in the industry?
Absolutely. It's a little bit of both. And yeah, I know, which is like never the answer. It's like the politician's answer, right? but I mean, I really believe in testing things. I really believe in creativity. I mean, because of my background, I'm a big proponent of just letting people be creative and try things. And so I'll never shoot an idea down because of data at the get-go. It's like, you have an idea for this thing, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. What I am a fan of is then following up and looking at the performance, so, we've had like, say, a video series. Someone created an idea for a video series, put a lot of effort into creating several episodes, never really gained traction. You got to give it time. Yeah. But if over time it doesn't gain traction, you got to make the hard choice that, hey, we're probably not seeing the payoff we need. Let's try a different, kind of off the wall idea and see if that one sticks. So that's why I think on the front end, let creativity drive it, but then always, on the back end, let the data help you prioritize and decide what to keep moving forward with and what to scrap.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you're actually looking at your visual storytelling strategy for the newsroom, what would you say are the most common challenges you come across and how do you solve them?
I think the biggest one is time. Mm-hmm. As much time as writing a story takes, shooting and editing a video, for example, takes so much longer, and then if you're adding in animation and all, it's amazing to me how time consuming visual storytelling in particular can be. And so that's where I feel we're not constrained by ideas at all. It's just it always comes down to resources. One example I can give you is that our podcast producer had this fantastic idea to do like a podcast pilot season where he put out the call to the entire newsroom and he said, if you have an idea for a podcast, pitch it. I'll record your pilot episode and then we can decide if this moves forward and becomes an Adweek podcast. So everyone got really excited. Everyone had lots of ideas to pitch. He selected like 5 that he wanted to move forward. My podcast idea was about failure. And then everyone realized no one had the time to actually create the podcast that they had pitched. So I think, there are a couple of lessons in there, or ways to counter that. I mean, one is to prioritize. Yeah, you have to really be smart about, is there a payoff for the time you're putting into something? And also is, if someone has a really good idea, building time into their schedule to work on it like a project, to actually freeing them up from some of the day-to-day to be able to execute.
Yeah, and let's bring up also the quality of the finished product.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe you can give us some 1 or 2 examples of success stories, and what do you measure? What are your KPIs for success?
Yeah, those are two great questions. I mean, a couple examples. One is an early example that it was a few years ago, and it was the thing that made me realize we needed to bring all of our artists together and create the Visual Newsroom. Was actually we had a web editor who was a gift champion, which is a real thing. I didn't know this before I met her, but they have gift making competitions out there, and she had won some of these. And so she's a digital native, really understands the web. And she had this idea for a magazine print cover. So we were featuring Lauren Conrad, the actress and kind of influencer, on our cover. and Lauren had filmed a GIF for us on set that we were going to use to promote the story on social media. And Diana McDougall, our web artist at the time, was like, hey, I have this idea for doing a printed GIF. I'm like, what is a printed GIF? Well, we ended up doing it. And what we did was print each frame of the GIF on the lower right-hand corner of each page of the magazine. So if you flipped it, almost like an old school flip book, you could see the GIF.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's...
And it was such a great visual representation of this idea of bringing together print and digital. And I was like, yeah, we've got to change the way we do things, because that cross-pollination is so cool. Like, how do we have more of that? Another big success story for us is our Super Bowl war room. So I'm in the midst of Super Bowl, coverage right now.
Yeah.
And something that we created with the Visual Newsroom really leading a big part of it is we all come together into the Adweek newsroom on Super Bowl Sunday. We watch the game and specifically the ads together, and every single person has a job. So every single person is, we've got one person who is just working on filming LinkedIn Live that night. We have one person who is just creating real-time reviews for Twitter. Everyone kind of has a job. And so if you watch Adweek's social channels in particular and our website that night, it looks like we have a 100-person team, covering the Super Bowl, because it's just all hands on deck. It's about 40 or 50 people covering it. And so we cover it in a very dynamic and a very visual and very real-time way. And that's something I think we've only been able to do because we have this kind of, multimedia DNA now.
So you have probably a lot of, news hijacking moments when you do it this way, right? Because you can actually come up with timely content as it happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the name of the game is always like spotting those buzzy moments. Like, what is that part of the ad that no one noticed or no one expected, or how are people reacting on Twitter that, how is that affecting the brand? So it's really, it's an exercise in thinking and creating on our feet. And I love it. Yeah. You asked about KPIs, how we measure success, which I think is really interesting. I mean, for us, the page view is still the best we have, although I think it's a flawed metric, but it at least lets us know, how many people saw something that we created. What we've started to look at more is repeat visitors. Mm-hmm. So how many people, came to say our brand vertical and then came back, and how many times did they come back, which I think is giving us a better idea of, okay, they saw that story, but did they find it valuable enough to return?
All stickiness ones, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Those loyal readership is I think going to be a really big one for us in 2020.
Got it. No, I think it's really, and you kind of create like attribution journeys that, they clicked on this link and moved to that link.
Yes. Yeah. We have someone who heads up our marketing and audience development department, and she uses Lytics, if you're familiar with that software, but really can give us a deep dive into our readership in terms of, what is, and actually we have a membership model now. It's something we converted to a year and a half ago, where to read stories on our site, you've got to let us know who you are. And then to read everything on our site, you have to pay a little bit. But that really gives us a sense of, okay, as a reader, like, what are you, Shlomi, interested in? What are you likely to click on? And am I sure to serve that up for you as an option when you log in?
Right. And by the way, just kind of to remind me, are you doing any personalization in your visual stories where people land on your website?
In terms of like what they see when they land on the website, it's actually something that we're working on right now. So right now, our homepage will look the same to whoever shows up. Yeah. But that is, I think that is the next frontier is being able to personalize it, and we have a couple departments working on that. And then I think another place where we can have some personalization is with our newsletters. Mm-hmm. That's one where we're creating more niche newsletters.
Yeah.
So not exactly personalization, but making sure that we have like really valuable personal feeling content around these different passion points within marketing. So one of our most popular newsletters is our retail newsletter. It's like the people who just really care about retail. We have a 4-person retail team, and they each take turns writing it every week. So every week a reader gets a sense of the voice and the personality of each of the writers, get to know them. So that's a change that we've made in recent months. Also, we're doing things like embedding quizzes, and we do a lot of interactive content on our Instagram stories where we can hear from people and then respond to them, and really, again, like making our content feel like a two-way communication, not a one-way.
You do also live shows like in Instagram Live or LinkedIn Live?
Yeah, we do. Speaking of how platforms have changed, for a while we did a lot of Facebook Live. And in the past year, I would say we've been testing more with LinkedIn. And we filmed some LinkedIn Lives from Cannes, from the Cannes Lions Festival in 2019. And we're going to be doing LinkedIn Live from our Super Bowl war room. So you'll be able to see our reporters, working in real time and get their reactions. And we've done a little bit with Instagram stories, although still on Instagram, we're doing more of the stories than the live video. Got
it. So among all the projects you're working on, what you are the most excited about?
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, in terms of we just rolled out a privacy map is sort of what we're referring to it as. But in the industry, you're probably aware a lot of regulation has come out around privacy and data, including GDPR and the CCPA, the California Privacy Protection Act. And so our journalists, both visual and our reporters got together and created this interactive map where you can click on each state to see what the privacy regulations are in that state and read news stories on a state-by-state basis. So that's a cool project because I think it'll have a longer shelf life than a lot of the things we create.
Yeah. If you can even provide, step-by-step process of how to implement those regulations, it will be even better, because I know a lot of marketers are really scratching in their head, what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. And that's another thing that I'm excited about is we're getting more and more involved in the education space. So our mission internally, I think I mentioned it before, but is that we want to help our readers do their jobs better. And we're realizing there's a need for education, especially with things like regulation and technology changing so quickly. And so last year, 2019, we launched the Institute for Brand Marketing. And with it, we're actually offering free classes around marketing and technology on our site. And to pull it off, our Visual Newsroom has been working with our editors and also with university professors. So those kind of 3 branches have been working together to create these courses. And that's a new frontier for our visual journalists. And it's been pretty exciting.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm actually going to teach a brand storytelling class later this fall. So maybe I'll reach out to you.
Oh, you should. You should. I've been out there trying to meet more and more marketing professors to bring their knowledge into our content. Yeah.
I'm happy. Yeah. So obviously, with your amazing track record with the Visual Newsroom and all the exciting projects you're working on, looking to the future, what do you think is the future of visual storytelling from your perspective? What are you seeing the major trends people should pay attention to?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I am in some ways seeing a return to basics. I would say 2 to 4 years ago, there was a lot of experimentation. So you were seeing brands experiment with like 6-second ads, like how much can we condense an ad, and how quickly can we tell a story? for people whose attention is so divided, right? And then I think we saw, like the New York Times, for example, doing a lot of really visually ambitious storytelling that almost felt cinematic. There's the classic Snowfall, if you remember that project, where you almost feel like you're in a movie theater as you're reading a story. And we, and also I remember going to a class at the Online News Association's annual conference about telling stories through VR. And at one point we were like, oh, I think everyone's going to be just consuming news through VR headsets. Anyway, I feel like the pendulum's swinging the other way. And we're seeing in the Super Bowl, for example, most of the ads are 60-second ads. And there are even a few brands that bought 90-second spots. So I see ads going back to sort of a longer form. I'm seeing, our digital storytelling projects get a little more simplified. We actually find that when we do really immersive storytelling online with parallax scrolling and images that run across the whole browser, the page views on those are lower. So it's making us rethink, like, okay, how complicated do people want the experience to be? Or do they just want the information? So that's one thing. I think just kind of going back to basics. And along those lines, just really placing an emphasis on UX and CX. Like, what is the reader experience? What is the reader story? Like, where are they when they're reading your content? What are they thinking about? What are their constraints? What's pulling at their attention? And really getting in their head and making sure that what we create is not just beautiful, but useful.
Yeah. And what do you think about paid media versus organic, church and state? It sounds like from what you describe is that, ads become more like organic content, like cinematic experiences. And organic content, is trying to do its best. But, sometimes, when those two trends are going together, it's going to be hard to distinguish, right?
Completely. And I mean, one example is we have a branded content studio at Adweek that is separate from editorial and separate from the Visual Newsroom. And but their content is labeled as such, but you'll find it on our homepage. It's woven in, and there are times where I'll click on one of our own branded content stories and not realize that it is. I'll say, oh, who wrote this? Oh, okay, it's from our branded content team. And like I said at the top of the show, I think it's a really positive thing that branded content creators have figured out how to create things that are really useful. And in fact, we had a branded content story. It was a project that our team created for Facebook. And it was all about how to shoot vertical video for Instagram.
Yep.
And the story went viral. It was like one of our top stories of the year, which I had never seen happen before. So I think the fact that it's getting to be better and better quality only serves everybody. It serves Adweek because we want to be associated with quality. It serves the client. It serves the reader. In terms of separation of church and state, that is still super important, I think. And we're very careful about that here, of making sure that as we collaborate more across departments, we also don't cross those lines.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy to navigate, but I think it's really important to, again, create that trust with your reader, that what we're creating is journalistically vetted and independent. So that hasn't gone away.
Yeah, no, it's great to see, because definitely we all know about banner blindness and, all the ad fraud. And so it's great to see that we kind of moving from interruption marketing to more kind of the empowered marketing, where you provide value content to really celebrate what your audience is really after.
Yeah.
So that's great to see. So just to kind of, since we kind of towards the end of the hour here, how would you summarize your top 3 tips for marketers that want to start telling visual stories like a media company?
I love that question. I'm going to give you my 3 C's. So So one is consider the reader or consider the audience.
Okay.
Actually, before I came to Adweek, I taught business writing classes to marketers and to a lot of different professionals. And the first lesson I always taught was consider your audience. So when you sit down, think about, kind of as I mentioned before, who are they? What do you know about them? What do they need? How are they consuming your content? And really putting your ego aside.
Yeah.
I think so often it's easy to create for ourselves, right? And as a writer, we fall in love with our words. Or as a visual artist, we're like, oh, we have this perfect thing, and the client didn't like it, But really, creating for that person and trying to get into their head is so important. And the second C is collaborate, and with that, cross train. So I used to run track, and to use a track analogy, think about where in your organization the baton is passed.
Right.
Where within your department is the baton passed, where between departments is the baton passed. And those are usually where problems arise, because they're your weak spots, right? Yeah. So figuring out ways that you can strengthen collaboration at the baton pass will make a big difference. And a lot of that, like I said, involves educating each other about your jobs, if not training each other in your job. And then the third is critique. And I was fortunate enough that I kind of came up in newsrooms before the digital revolution. You know what I mean? I was taught by some very old school journalists who were, like running like the Chicago Tribune and the Sun's, the Sun Sentinel in Florida in the 1970s. And they were not shy about giving feedback and critique, and in a way that wasn't personal, but that was just about the work.
Exactly.
And yeah, and that's something I actually have always loved about newsrooms. There's a certain, just everyone understands we're working quickly, and we have to, the way to do our best is just to be honest about our work and give feedback. And so, like I said, making sure, let that creativity flow, but don't forget to follow up by actually having the hard conversation. Was it worth the effort? Did people find value in it? Is it worth doing again?
Absolutely. No, these are amazing tips I know my audience would love, because as they build their newsrooms and try to innovate, it's really hard to fall on too many traps. So these are really amazing tips. Thank you again. So just before we close, if anybody would like to contact you, if they have any questions.
Absolutely. I would love to hear from your listeners. The best way is probably email. So I'm at stephanie.paterik@adweek.com, stephanie.paterik@adweek.com. That's the best way. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter. I have an unusual last name, so you can find me easily. I'm the only Steph Paterik out there. And please reach out to me anywhere you find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This is an amazing conversation. I really had a lot of fun chatting with you. And for all of you watching on YouTube or listening, stay tuned to our next episode. So until next time, stay true to your stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Shlomi.
Visual Storytelling Today is recorded in Miami, Florida. The show is published exclusively by Visual Storytelling Institute. Learn more at visualstorytell.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on the iTunes Store. Until next time, don't let your big story wait to be told.